are often described as the future of our countries, our cities, and our communities. However, states, cities, and school districts across the country have cultivated discriminatory laws, policies, and practices that maintain the inequality of our children throughout much of our history. Even after the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that racial segregation of children in public schools violated their 14th Amendment rights, integration remained an uphill battle. Community engagement and court oversight led to the desegregation of individual schools and the triumphant appointment of Philadelphia's first black superintendent, but resistance and changing demographics tragically drove the district and the courts to ultimately abandon the goal of citywide integration. From World War I through 1970, blacks moved from the rural South to the urban North seeking better jobs and living conditions during a period known as the Great Migration. This trend exploded after World War II. Newly arrived blacks settled primarily in West and North Philadelphia, which became increasingly segregated. From 1950 to 1970, the black population in Philadelphia grew from 18% to 34%. Unfortunately, these new arrivals were met with racism and resistance. White flight led many white residents to move to rapidly developing suburbs and neighborhoods like Northeast Philadelphia. Predatory lending, housing, and job discrimination drove many blacks into poverty, making it difficult for them to escape these neighborhoods. Officially, the School District of Philadelphia, or SDP, stopped segregating schools in 1930. However, segregated neighborhoods gave rise to segregated schools. West Philadelphia High School was 97% black by 1961. By 1962, black children represented a majority of students in the school district. While 92% of black school-age children were enrolled in the public school system, 55% of white students attended parochial schools. Furthermore, the majority of black students attended segregated schools. Majority black schools were often located in older, segregated, and more densely populated sections of the city. As a result, the school buildings were overcrowded and dilapidated. Furthermore, the SDP's long-standing practice of prohibiting black teachers from teaching white students reinforced de facto segregation in Philadelphia's public schools. World War II and inspired a campaign for equal treatment of blacks by organizations such as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, which successfully challenged school segregation on a national level with Brown v. Board of Education in 1954. The Supreme Court's ruling that separate facilities were inherently unequal galvanized communities across the country to take a stand and demand integration. Organizations such as the Emlyn Federation of Civic Organizations, EFCO, emerged in the integrated neighborhoods of West and Northwest Philadelphia to take steps towards integration. EFCO was the first of these organizations to hold the school district accountable in court. The Eleanor C. Emlyn Public School had become overcrowded and segregated due to excessive student transfers of both black and white students in the late 1950s. As a result, the Anna B. Day Public School was built nearby to reduce overcrowding. Although the Emlyn and Day schools were both located in the diversifying Mount Airy neighborhood of Northwest Philadelphia, their boundary lines were drawn to ensure their segregation. Furthermore, the SDP's practice of assigning black teachers to black schools led white parents to assume Emlyn was becoming an all-black school and transfer their children out. After the SDP refused to address their concerns, EFCO partnered with the Philadelphia NAACP to take legal action. In Chisholm v. Board of Public Education, a federal lawsuit filed in 1961, the plaintiffs argued that the SDP purposely established racist school policies, practices, and boundaries to create segregated schools, violating the 14th Amendment rights of black students. The court ruled that the school district must formulate a plan for desegregating its schools and submit regular progress reports to the court. Community engagement and court oversight had triumphed over racism and resistance. Although Chisholm was the base of desegregation efforts in Philadelphia, it tragically failed to yield any effective plan from the school district. The Lewis Committee, appointed by the judge to prepare recommendations for the SDP, formulated a report that was not prescriptive enough to prompt immediate, lasting change, and the school district ignored it. The national NAACP did not provide enough support to present a stronger case, and the local chapter did not have the resources to survey conditions in the public schools. Tragically, EFCO's attempt to bring about desegregation through the federal court was unsuccessful. The case was dismissed in 1967 and accomplished little in the end. The Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, or PHRC, continued to battle the SDP in the state court. It was empowered by the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act of 1955 to address the problem of de facto as well as de jure segregation. The PHRC negotiated with the SDP and filed 11 lawsuits over 40 years to force the district to present and comply with a satisfactory plan to desegregated schools. The PHRC oversaw SDP plans that included the creation of magnet schools and programs to appeal to a diverse student body, voluntary busing, and school transfers of black and white students and teachers. The SDP began to experiment with magnet schools in the 1960s in an effort to stem white flight. Tragically, some voluntary transfers to magnet schools had negative effects. A clear example is the Samuel Gomber School, a majority black school in the predominantly white Overbrook section of West Philadelphia. The school was converted to a magnet school, but as of 1971, only 2% of its students were white, far below the predicted 31%. Most of the white children in that neighborhood attended private schools. Some magnet schools were successfully integrated, however. By 1979, the Philadelphia High School of Engineering and Science triumphantly enrolled almost 300 freshmen in North Philadelphia, with the number evenly balanced between whites and minorities. Nevertheless, only 2 out of 6 magnet schools established in the 1970s actually fostered integration, and although 19 magnet schools and 12 magnet programs were created by 1994, the PHRC found that their modest success did not influence the overall desegregation of Philadelphia's school district. The PHRC had more success integrating teachers at schools across the district. In 1969, the SDP voluntarily agreed to implement teacher assignment and transfer policies with the goal of at least 20% black or white teachers in elementary schools and a minimum of 10% of either race in high schools. One of the teachers hired and promoted under this policy was Constance Leighton, who was triumphantly appointed the district's first black female superintendent in 1983. Leighton proposed a plan with clear goals that identified specific schools for desegregation through voluntary busing and additional resources to improve low-achieving, mostly black and Hispanic schools.
Most of the busing was done from black students from all over the city were bused to Northeast schools, which then were pretty much white schools in the Northeast and far Northeast of Philadelphia. And some white students were bused to schools in places like Mount Airy, Chestnut Hill, Center City, where they felt that they had a reasonable chance of being desegregated. There was a white community surrounding the school that wasn't using it.
By 1987, the number of students in desegregated schools had increased by 55%. The pace of white flight had slowed. There were 34 newly desegregated schools, and the teaching staff of every school in the city had been integrated. At its peak in the 1980s, voluntary busing and changing demographics eventually integrated predominantly white schools in Roxborough and parts of South and Northeast Philadelphia. Despite this triumph, Clayton's plan did not reach its goals, and the PHRC continued to push for mandatory busing. The SDP argued that it did not have the funds to implement large-scale busing, which was unpopular with elected officials and the public. By the time the PHRC's case against the Philadelphia School District was resolved in 2009, the focus had moved to improving majority-minority schools instead of integrating them. In the short term, voluntary busing in some magnet schools had modest success. Where integration was implemented, it was often popular and effective. According to Ralph Smith, architect of Clayton's voluntary desegregation plan, it has served to mobilize attention, resources, and energy in support of educational improvements that otherwise may not have been made. Because of desegregation, we have better schools. The black-white achievement gap shrank in integrated schools from 1970 to 1990. In the long term, Americans stopped seeing integration as a strategy to close the black-white achievement gap. As voluntary desegregation fell out of favor in the early 20th century, Philadelphians began to see the public schools as failing, favoring charter schools instead. Tragically, segregation is still a significant problem in Philadelphia. By 2018, only 24% of teachers in the SDP were black, down from a peak of 40%, and only a shocking 14% of students were white.
The school district can only do what it can do. I think if families are unwilling to take a risk on a school where there's a minority population, it won't happen.
Many Philadelphia charter schools are even more segregated. Even now, decades after Brown, children are still attending schools that are separate and unequal. Students of all colors will continue to suffer the effects of segregation until the school district of Philadelphia makes a purposeful effort to address it.
To be young, gifted, and black and own it, it's more than a moment, it's like the sun rose to condone it.